nothing of this kind. It's a very sad picture of the weakness of Judea. And you see that Shimshon is actually a lonely fighter. Now I claim that there is a symmetry between the verses which the narrator says about the confrontation with the lion and the verses which tell us the confrontation with the Plishtim. So it's a little difficult to manage with the English, so I will translate it myself. I'll read it in Hebrew and in English, my English. Vehu ba'at karmei Timna, this was in the vineyards, and he approached the vineyards of Timnah. V'hine kfir harayot shoeg likrato, and here's a lion, strong lion roaring against him. What do we have in our story? Hu ba'ad lechi, the very same words but a different place. He approached Lechi. Uplishtim heriu likrato, just as the lion was roaring, now the Plishtim are roaring. But itzlach alav ruach Hashem, and the Spirit of God overcame him. This is the very same words are in both stories. He has to be aroused in order that all his powers will come out. So when they are roaring, whether it's the lion or the people, he gets all this divine energy in him. But itzlach alav ruach Hashem. And there it has Vayshas'eu keshasa hagdi, and it tears him up like you tear a kid. And here it says Vatiyena ha'avotot asher alav kapishtim. There's also a simile, and the ropes which are on his hands become like flax, which means like, threads. Umuma en biyado, he has nothing in his hands vis-a-vis a lion. And here he says vayimtza lechi chamor triya, and he doesn't have any weapon, so he looks around and he finds the jawbone of a donkey, of an ass. How do you say? Yes. Okay? And he picks it up, which means he has such a bone in his hand, and he says triya, which means that it's not right up, but it is fresh. And there it says that he ולא הגיד לאביו ולאמו את אשר עשה, and here it says, and he killed 1,000 people with this jawbone. And I want to, you don't believe it. Thank you, we need an opposition in Israeli government. And I'm so happy we have here a person who is planted here to say twice or thrice every lesson he doesn't, but what don't you believe? You see, this is his trick to get a word. What don't you believe?
I don't believe that 1,000 people line up to be killed one after another. It's
Shtuyot, you say?
Absolutely.
We waste a biblical story on you. Really? No, I mean it seriously. They don't line up. Now, to please you, let's erase the word Shimshon and say Hercules. Suddenly it becomes logical. Hercules stands vis-a-vis 1,000 well-armed Trojan people or whatever, and he goes around, and whoever is not running away quickly, he kills him. They don't line up. If you want to take a zero off, I don't have quarrels. But what is important is that you have one person like Goliath, who made all Israelis flee away. And this you believe. And here you have a Jewish Goliath. And he has no weapon, because he never prepared a war. But he knows that he overcomes everybody without any regard to their number. This is what 1,000 people mean. Whatever enemy you confront, he is unbelievably stronger than everybody. And they start to flee, and he is running like these football players. They run very quickly. I always wonder how they know to run. He also knows to run. So he's running after them. and killing everybody who is moving. What don't you believe in? Now what is really important is theology, for me. Will he tell his mother and father or not? So I'll tell you the verse which gives you the answer. This is the verse which is written in verse. And Vayomer Shimshon, verse 16. Bilchi hamor, bilchi hamor, hamor chamorotayim. Bilchi hamor, hiketi 1,000 ish. This is standard biblical poetry with parallelism. Now they succeeded to translate it very beautifully. With a jaw of an S, mess upon mess. You see that he is a great English poet? They translated it nicely. Chamor chamorotayim doesn't mean a dog and a donkey, which is twice a donkey. No, it means, like Radak explains, I made heaps of corpses of them. Chamor chimartim, this is what Radak says, which is a pun on chamor, very clever. So they, with the jaw of an S, mess upon mess, in English you get something of this wordplay. With the jaw of an S, I have slain 1,000 men. What is missing from this victorious self-praise? The name of God. This is an utterly secular poem of victory. Here he stands, and I forgot to say that he threw the jawbone away. He is not, he won't put it on the piano so that his grandchildren will see how courageous he was. No. It's self-understood that he's so strong, so he throws away the jawbone. I like this more than everything. And now there he stands. No God in heaven, no Israelites. The great lonely hero. Bilchi hamor, hiketi 1,000 ish. With the jawbone of an S, I have killed 1,000 people. So now you are very curious what God will do. Verse 17. And he finished speaking, he threw the jawbone away, hence the place was called Ramat Lehi. Lehi is a jawbone, Ramat Lehi is the throwing of a jawbone. It has in Hebrew a double meaning. It is a hill of Lehi, but it can mean also the throwing away. Ramo Rama Bayam. And as he finished, in verse 18, he was very thirsty. Let's read it in Hebrew. I read verse 18. ויצמא מאוד, ויקרא אל אדוני ויאמר, אתה נתת ביד עבדך את התשועה הגדולה הזאת, ואתה אמות בצמא, ונפלתי ביד הערלים. שמשון makes תשובה. He is exhausted. And he is utterly thirsty. And he needs a cup of water. Then he understands that he has to pray. And he changes entirely and he says, you yourself have granted this great victory. What can I do with the translation? In Hebrew it says teshuah, not nitzachon. And teshuah in English must be translated deliverance, which is a religious term. You have made yourself, you have given me this deliverance through your servant. Through your servant. There are only one verse between the secular song and the sincere prayer. And now he speaks in religious terms and he says, you have given me this deliverance and I shall die and be delivered into the hands of the uncircumcised. Suddenly he remembers that they are not Jews. Uncircumcised. I hope that you see that we have here a man fleeing from his mission, and God pursuing him. So God brings upon him this thirst to remember him where he really stands. And when he makes this wonderful prayer, God opens a well, no, not a well, Mayan, a spring in a Carter which is there, and Shimshon gives this spring the name Ein HaKoreh Asher Balechi. And our translators did not dare to translate it, but you know Hebrew. Ein is Mayan, right? Ein is spring. Koreh is קרוב השם לכל קוראיו אשר יקראו באמת. לקרוא is not only to read but to cry out, to pray. So Shimshon he is a great man after all. He understood that his secular arrogance was out of place, and here he calls for generations to come. He calls the spring of the one who prayed for it. Ein HaKoreh. Very beautiful. I was working in Bet Shemesh and they called the library Ein HaKoreh. Yeah. This is a territory of Shimshon, you know. The gas station is called Shimshon. Everything is Shimshon there. So they called the library Ein HaKoreh, but this means the spring of the reader. But this is a pun on the biblical meaning of Ein HaKoreh, the spring of. And then it says, and he saved, in Hebrew it judged, which means that he saved Israel for 20 years. 20 years is half a generation. I think we spoke about it, that the Judges, in the book of Judges, you have this chronology, this round number chronology. A generation is 40 years, half a generation is 20 years, and 2 generations is 80 years. You have this. Summing up. And the clever, intelligent reader understands this must mean, and there was peace for Israel for 20 years. After, this unbelievable victory, they didn't dare to come and ask for taxes, the Plishtim. So there was peace or truce for half a generation. You say, wonderful. But you say, why half a generation? Because Shimshon, Yetzer Hara of Shimshon, is aroused again in the next chapter. Now we look at our watch. Now, half an hour, I hope we manage. Now we have a very short anecdote. Shimshon and the prostitute in Gaza. Unbelievable. Our strong man has to provoke the Plishtim, go in the main street of Gaza and look for a prostitute. And this you believe? Not only that they don't, they flee from him. They even tell him his address, the address. This he believes, because he believes a man against a man. All right. So here he comes to this prostitute, which means he needs a Philistine woman. Even on the very base, how do you say?
The lowest.
Lowest, what lowest? Yes, all right. You understand what I mean. In other words, he wants a very quick and simple sexual satisfaction. This is what it says. And here he goes to this house of this prostitute. And his instincts tell him that they will try to make use of his being amongst them. And that they don't dare to enter this room because in one room he chokes to death everybody. No sane man will enter a room where Shimshon is lying. But if they fortify the gate of the city and put on the upper stages, like in the Iratika, boiling water or boiling oil, and he in the morning will approach this gate, they will have a chance to overcome him. So he hears the silence. The